Thank you all for joining us today. I really appreciate it and kind of being a guinea pig for us. The Georgia State Board is going to host a town hall series, a virtual town hall series this year, periodically, with different topics that we have heard from you as Georgia sisters that you want to hear about or are interested in. And we're just trying to provide another platform to get some information out there, have good conversation, and not just wait for local chapter workshops or convention to disseminate some of this great information. So our first official virtual town hall series is going to be presented by the Amendments and Recommendations Committee. That may seem boring to some of you. Nancy and I both have this in common. We both love amendments, and I think they are fun and exciting. And I enjoy amendments because they are a way to bring change to the organization, move things forward. And I think they're incredibly important. Sometimes we find them boring, but what's most important is that we understand how they work, why we have them, and really the process involved in order to get them through. So I will pass it off to Nancy, who I had the pleasure of serving on the board with, and is now past state president, a member of Chapter BK, and is also the A&R chair. So I'll have her introduce her committee.
Thank you. Thank you, Kathleen. I would ask everybody to mute your computers, and we ask that you participate by listening for a while, because there's some information coming in kind of a cool way and informative. And if you have any questions, you can do it the old-fashioned way and write them down on a piece of paper and a pen, and then we'll talk about them later. Or you can put them in the chat, which would be really good, because Kathleen will be going through the chat. And at the end of this session, we will have a question and answer session. So please mute yourselves. And I want to welcome you, of course, and I'm so glad you took your time to be here. I have participated in town halls in other states, and they are an amazing tool. We are your 2024-2025 Amendments and Recommendations Committee, usually referred to as the A&R Committee, and we want to share with you the amendment process from start to finish. We hope you'll receive valuable information, and also that we raise some questions, and you can find out how you can be involved in this. Let me introduce your committee to you. I'm Nancy Burke, as Kathleen said, Chapter BK Athens. I'm a past state president and chair of the committee. Nicole Rutowski is from Chapter AZ in Noonan. She is serving her second year on our Amendments and Recommendations Committee. And Diane Battle is from Chapter BF in Blairsville, and she's serving her first year. P.E.O. is a true grassroots organization. The sisters in Original A in Mount Pleasant first wrote and developed our laws and rules beginning on January 23, 1869. These were changed and increased by early local chapters under the oversight of Chapter A until Grand Chapter adopted the Constitution, the governing rules of our organization, in 1883. The Constitution has since been amended over time by the votes of local chapters and their delegates at state, provincial, and district conventions, and the conventions of international chapter.
So there's a process of presenting amendments to our Constitution, the procedure for P.E.O. chapter meetings, the ceremony of initiation, or the ceremony of installation. We're going to use a little bit of time to explain it, and we're calling this rules, rules, rules. Let's look at our governing documents. You can go to the first slide, please. First, we have our Constitution. Our Constitution is a set of fundamental principles that identify how an organization is governed and guarantees certain rights to the people in it. The Constitution is where the primary characteristics of an organization are defined. The Constitution of P.E.O. Sisterhood does exactly that. Each of its parts describes the principles or the rules and set the structure for how the international chapter, the state, provincial, district chapters, and local chapters operate. Constitutions hold the highest level of rules and do not usually contain rules that are procedural in nature or policies. In the P.E.O. Constitution, you will find membership, officer, and meeting requirements. Next slide, please. Second, there are Georgia State Chapter bylaws. These bylaws identify how our Georgia chapter will operate within the Constitution of the P.E.O. Sisterhood. This is where you would find the method for nominating officers, standing committees, Georgia State Chapter dues, and other rules that are specific to our state chapter. Third are your local chapter bylaws. These are the laws that are specific to your chapter. They will state the meeting dates and your local chapter dues. They will also identify the standing committees your chapter has agreed upon, among other things. So we know that we have international rules, Georgia rules, and local chapter rules. No provisions in your local chapter bylaws may conflict with our Georgia chapter bylaws and standing rules of our international constitution, bylaws, and standing rules. Likewise, no provisions in our Georgia chapter bylaws and standing rules may conflict with international constitution, bylaws, and standing rules. For example, the Georgia chapter can't have a bylaw that says members can't be over 50 because that would conflict with the Constitution. Your local chapter bylaws couldn't state that your dues would only go to international and your local chapter, as the bylaws of our Georgia chapter require dues also go to them. As time passes, we identify new ways of doing things or find that words written decades ago may no longer be relevant or helpful. Each of these documents has the method of changing or amending described. The A&R Committee, with guidance from the Study and Research Committee of International Chapter, referred to as the S&R Committee, make sure that proposed changes don't conflict with other parts of the Constitution or bylaws. Next slide. As an organization, we have chosen to use the current edition of Robert's Rules of Order as our parliamentary authority. So, if a rule or procedure isn't spelled out in our governing documents, we use Robert's Rules to describe how to move forward. You each have a working knowledge of Robert's Rules. You're using Robert's Rules in your chapter meetings when you use the President's Book. While there might be times that the formality seems silly, especially in a small group that knows each other well, the structure is really helpful. Robert's Rules guides us to, first, next slide, to do one thing at a time. Second, one person to. Only one person may talk at a time. Next one is enough of us have to be here to decide. That means a quorum. Next, everybody has the right to have their voice heard through voting. And lastly, silence equals consent. So let's look how the amendment process works in P.E.O. As an amendment can be proposed by a local chapter, a standing state committee or state executive board, no matter which is the source, the procedure is basically the same.
Okay. Just for fun, let's say the two of you, while talking at lunch, decide we should have courtesy committee at the international chapter level, and their duty should be to send birthday and P.E.O. anniversary cards to each member in the mail. After all, in this electronic age, we receive nearly as many birthday cards as we used to receive, and you miss having to put them on. You miss having them put on the mantle. The two of you check out the Constitution and Manual for Amendments and Recommendations Committees, Part 4, and find the requirements to submit a proposed amendment that would create a new standing committee for international chapter. You are overwhelmed by the rules. First, you have to get your chapter's support. You know that they all think exactly like you do, so this will be a slam dunk. But wait, you have to present it at one meeting and then have a counted ballot in the next meeting. What's with that? Remember, when we said our Constitution comprised our fundamental principles are not changed willy-nilly. Change must be purposeful and deliberate. By presenting in writing at one meeting and then voting at the next, you give all of your members time to thoughtfully consider the implications of the proposed change. And you provide an opportunity for those that might really care about the issue, but were not present at the first meeting, to be there when the vote is taken. Remember that each member has the right to have her voice heard through our voting process. Unlike the decision to pay a bill, which is a majority vote, the impact of changing the Constitution is far greater, so it requires a 2/3 vote via a counted ballot, written or electronic vote, for the chapter to approve the proposed amendment. You were right. Your chapter ZZ did agree with you that International Courtesy Committee should be formed. The proposal now belongs to chapter ZZ, and it's not just the two of you that had that productive lunch meeting. The next step is for this to be sent to the Georgia State Chapter A&R Committee. We will work with the International Chapter's S&R Committee, even though Chapter ZZ's proposal had the standing committee name, Courtesy Committee, and had the duties identified, send birthday and anniversary cards to each member annually by postal service. There may be other wording that needs to be added. Chapter ZZ will probably hear back a suggestion that new language be added that describes how the committee is formed. Maybe a 3-member committee with each appointed for a 6-year term. And it will need to be decided where to put this requirement in the Constitution. Once all the official language is agreed upon by S&R and Chapter ZZ, we're on to the next step. Even though Chapter ZZ thinks this is a good idea, change to the Constitution requires more support than from one chapter. The executive board of the Georgia State Chapter will send the proposal out to the local chapters for polling. Whenever your chapter receives a proposed amendment to the international chapter document, which could be Constitution, the procedure for P.E.O. meeting, P.E.O. chapter meeting, the ceremony of initiation, or the ceremony of installation, the duty of each chapter is to decide whether the proposal has merit and should be considered at our state convention. Your chapter will certainly discuss what they think the implications might be of the change and will vote with the knowledge they have at that time. If 2/3 of the members present and voting at your chapter meeting voted pro, that's a favorable ballot. Next, it requires 2/3 of the responding chapters to vote pro in our state for the proposal to be debated at our convention. So let's recap. So far, Chapter ZZ wrote a proposal and voted on it at the next meeting and sent it to us, the State Amendments and Recommendations Committee. The wording was fine-tuned with the help from S&R Committee. Then the proposal was sent to each local chapter to decide if it should be considered at the state convention. 45 days is set for the time for local chapters to vote and report those votes. This time frame ensures that each chapter will have at least one scheduled meeting before votes are due. Local chapters discussed and voted. From the returned report of vote forms, the state executive board counted the votes and 2/3 of the responding chapters voted pro. The proposed amendment will be presented at the state convention. In our fictitious story, Chapter ZZ proposed amendment did receive favorable return vote forms from over 2/3 of the local chapters responding in our state and will be considered at the state convention. It will be included as part of the proposed amendment document distributed to all chapters in advance of convention as directed by state bylaws.
So moving forward in time, imagine Chapter ZZ's proposal with overwhelming support was now being presented at state convention. During debate, a sister stands up and asks how much this is going to cost. Another suggests that sending birthday cards is really a job of the local chapter, and that getting one from international might really be lost and look just like the other one you get from your insurance agent. A counted ballot is taken, and Chapter ZZ's proposal just squeaks by with 2/3 support of the members of convention. Why is the support different than if it was when locals chapter voted? Local chapters didn't have the benefit of hearing the discussion that occurred at convention. They based their support on what they knew within their chapter or PEO experience. But it still was approved, so now the proposal to add an international courtesy committee is forwarded to the chair of the S&R committee for consideration at the next convention of international chapter. The proposal no longer belongs to Chapter ZZ. It is now owned by our state chapter. Next, click. Yes. Okay. Every PEO member is advised of amendments under consideration by their publication in the record in the spring preceding convention of international chapter. Let's fast forward again and imagine that you're sitting at the 2025 convention of international chapter where the proposed amendment is being considered. This fictitious proposal from our state chapter is being considered. Yay! Discussion goes back and forth. Pro, this is wonderful and just the kind of gracious, loving support each member needs. Con, what a waste of time and money. Pro and then con, back and forth. The vote is taken and the amendment is defeated. In our state, faces are sad.
With the failure to implement the desired change in the Constitution, does this mean it was a bad idea to propose the change? Absolutely not. We applaud the two sisters with an idea for improvement. We applaud Chapter ZZ for taking the steps necessary to move the amendment forward. We applaud all chapters that took the time to discuss the merits of the amendment at their meeting and vote. Yes, we do celebrate all of you, whether you voted pro or con. While our International Courtesy Committee proposal was totally fictitious, even this one had each of you thinking about whether you send birthday and PEO anniversary cards and about whether they are appreciated or not. The discussion itself has value. We learn a lot through discussion. The bylaws and standing rules of the Georgia State Chapter are amended in much the same way. A local chapter, state standing committee, or the executive board can propose an amendment. The proposal is submitted to the A&R committee following the guidelines in the bylaws and standing rules. The A&R committee shares the proposed amendment with the S&R committee, that's the international committee, to review for conformity with the PEO Constitution and the other Georgia bylaws and standing rules and for clarity in effect, intent, and purpose. After the proposed amendment is deemed compliant and in proper language, the S&R committee approves it for distribution to local Georgia chapters in accordance with Georgia state rules. Proposed state amendments require only review and discussion by the local chapter. The local chapters take no vote. The amendments will be presented at the next state convention for voting by the certified delegation. The local chapters are requested to send their delegations informed but not instructed. As stated earlier, the discussion and debate at state convention often raises viewpoints not considered in individual local chapters. You are encouraged to participate in the amendment process. Local chapters that choose to participate in what is by design a highly regimented course to propose amendments to international documents are applauded. Your participation is what changes the rules of our sisterhood. It means that you feel ownership in our sisterhood. It's your right and it's your responsibility. This concludes our presentation, and we thank you for your attendance and attention to what we're presenting. We will now open the town hall for questions, and please type your questions into the chat session, and Kathleen will work her magic and we'll try to answer each question as we can. And if we can't answer it, don't have an answer, we will do our best to find it for you and let you know. So do we have any questions, Kathleen?
Nothing yet.
Any comments? They don't have to be questions. Any comments?
Nancy, I always say after a presentation, if I have no questions, I did my job. Everybody knows everything.
Oh, that's kind of scary.
I'll put in a selfish plug. If anyone is interested in serving on the Amendments and Recommendations Committee, you can reach out to P.E.O, who is here with us, who's our Georgia State Vice President, who is responsible for filling our committee positions.
And as Kathleen said, it's one of those things that you can get really nerdy over. Kathleen and I both do. Puri does too, I know. But you learn a lot, and it's interesting because you end up working with a member of the S&R committee, and that is a past state president from another state, province, or district who is serving at the international level. And they have a lot of information. It's really fun to work with them as well. So it's all a learning and growing experience to serve on this committee. And we find out how
I'll say one thing too that can be very beneficial for you in your own local chapters that we can all play a role in is when the amendments come out to your local chapters and you are asked to read them or summarize them and go through them. I know it takes a lot of time in your meeting. And I know a lot of times people huff and puff as soon as we get to the amendments that have to be read at 2 different meetings, and then we have to vote. And even the same at convention, there's sometimes grumbling about, oh, now we have to do amendments. I think it's sometimes contagious if you just remind people that, you know, nothing would have ever changed or progressed in P.E.O if it weren't for amendments. And so amendments are very important. Changes do take time because we follow a you know, a great process where people get to vote on things. It's a democratic process. And so sometimes if you're about to read those, what you can do is kind of set the mood for your chapter and say, hey, remember that amendments are a positive thing. And we appreciate the people who took the time to sit down and write them and research them and study them. And that it is our duty as P.E.Os in Georgia to kind of read through them with an open mind and learn from them as well. So I think that's one thing that we can all do in our chapters. Yes, Francie.
I just wanted to say that if you follow the process in the local chapter when you're changing your own local chapter bylaws, it really helps you to understand what you see further up the trail. Meaning, go ahead and present your bylaw that you might want to be changing in writing so that everybody can see it. It can be sent out in the newsletter. It can be read. It can be printed out, passed around at the meeting, whatever. But if you follow that process and give everybody a chance to say something or do or see it, then at least they can speak up. Even if they can't come to the meeting, they might be able to write back and answer it. It's a good process to make sure everyone in the chapter is in agreement or disagreement and it's voted down, whatever.
Nancy, will you remind everyone of their timing? So if anyone here or anyone in their chapter is thinking that they might want to propose a change to something at the local or international level, what date do they need to do that by?
The local amendments have to be to us by, what is it, November? I don't have it in front of me. November 1st?
First, yeah, I put you on the spot.
Yes. And yeah, you did. And international amendments are March. No, I gotta look. They're later, but those are and we do have, we're coming up on a CIC year. So I
think they changed it to like February because it was getting too close. Something,
yeah,
January or February.
Yeah. Oh dear. See, we're not into it yet.
Yep,
I
so
just know it's November because I know I have heard rumors that the executive board has yet more amendments coming, and so I want them to hurry and get them to us.
Okay, we got one question.
Yes.
Can you share what the most controversial amendment proposal has been? Well, that would be a personal opinion.
I remember in 1997, I went to the CIC in Seattle, and the most controversial thing that had happened for a long time, and you got to know, an amendment at CIC often takes 3 CIC sessions, so that's 6 years to get through. That's not unusual. And the year in 1997, the big hot topic was whether or not we could use a Bible that was not the King James Version. And that was a hot topic. And I remember and I don't want to offend this woman. I have no idea who she was, but it stuck with me. There were lots of good arguments, pro and con, but the woman who stood up and said we have to use the King James Version because that's the way Jesus talked, that stayed with me. I was like, what? You know?
Nancy, I can go a little further back. That one of the big controversial discussions at a CIC was in 1979, and it was in Anaheim, and we were changing from Supreme to International Chapter.
Yeah. That's a big change.
Lots of yes.
Mhm.
So many people wanted to hang with the tradition of Supreme Chapter, and you had to remind everyone that it started out as Grand Supreme and then went to just Supreme, but it didn't incorporate who we are in the whole by the United States and Canada. So it passed, obviously.
And Kathleen,
I can tell you which amendment I'm most thankful for that came before me. It was the amendment to change the number of years needed for service on the state board from 7 to 5. So I'm very thankful for that proposed amendment. I don't know if I'd be able to do that, and thankful for all of the women before me who did do the 7 years.
yes. Kathleen, do you have the quote in your head? What did Frank Rhodes say at the early convention in the early 1900s about change?
I do have it. I have to look it up.
She had it in her speech at
I think it was in the convention program this last time.
Yeah, it was. It was in Kathleen's speech. I love it because everybody says, "Oh, we've had these traditions for so long and we can't change them." And she said, "You're not going to grow unless you change. That's part of growth." And some of the changes that have been, it's kind of silly. We get silly. We're people, we're human. Some of the most controversial things are just because it's a change, not because it improved or didn't improve or anything. It's just change is hard for people to
and they're not all silly. Some of them are incredibly important and also incredibly hard. There has been a lot of times that I've been at conventions and I've listened to the pros and cons, and I've really gone, oh gosh, I don't know. I see both sides, and this is a really important thing to discuss. And that's something that I think about a lot too when we're discussing amendments. I think one of the coolest things is when you go to a convention with an idea of how you would vote or are going to vote, and then you listen to the discussion and you go, oh, I think I changed my mind. Or this decision won't be as hard. And I think that's also one of the coolest things to be a part of and witness.
One of the things we didn't talk about, we have something pending from Georgia at CIC, and that is Chapter A, which is Kathleen's chapter, and Laura DeMars and several sent the proposal in. We voted on it last year on whether to start another project for certified studies rather than degreed studies, and that was for vocational and technical certificates. And that was voted in, and it was not made an amendment when it was voted. The first vote was to appoint a study committee at the international level and to further refine the idea. The idea is good. Everybody likes it, but it wasn't adopted just like that. It was assigned to a committee to research it and further define it. We should have it at CIC in Arizona next year, right? To vote on?
You'll have the results of the committee's research, because we
Report.
put forth a resolution to tax international with studying it. The formal development of it, whether it's going to happen or not, will probably not come in Phoenix. It'll probably be the next one down.
Orlando. Okay. So it's a slow process, but that's a deliberate process. I think the word deliberate is so important because it's done so you don't do it twice. So you don't do it and then say, why did we ever adopt it this way? And then you're changing a change and a change. And when you do it that slow. So it does seem laborious, but at the same time, it's thorough and it makes it a concise, even though it takes a long time, it's still a concise procedure. I think that's important for PEO.
Yep. And I wanted to leave you all with this one last thing that you can do in your local chapters is take out your bylaws that are usually in your yearbook and read them. For some of us, we haven't read them in years and years and years, and you'll be surprised when you read them with a fresh perspective. And start asking yourself, are there any barriers in there that are preventing growth in your chapter or providing extra work that's not necessary, or that things can be streamlined? And then go back to your chapter and bring that up for discussion. And I just think that's always important to take a step back and look at your own bylaws and make sure that there's no barriers in there preventing us from moving forward.
Just think where we were 5 years ago before COVID. And what COVID did to our bylaws and all of our rules in PEO. We were not allowed to have virtual meetings. Any kind of conference call or anything had to be done on a landline or AT&T, and you had to call into international and get a number. And oh my goodness, it was so hard. We couldn't have done this meeting at all 5 years ago. It would have been illegal, if you like that word, or improper under our rules. And COVID brought us forward. That's good.
Well, I want to thank Nancy and Nicole and Diane. I'm so appreciative of you for kicking us off, talking about one of my favorite subjects. Thank you all for showing up. Stay tuned for next month. Laura, you want to give us this is a sneak peek. No one knows yet. You guys get first to know. What's our next topic?
Next month is the International Projects Committee. We'll be sharing with you hints and helpful strategies for having successful candidates at STAR and Scholar. Both of those applications are coming out in August, so we want to help you grab as many candidates and be successful with them.
And we'll send that out in the newsletter, put it online, and put it on the Facebook. So be sure to share with all your chapters so that they'll show up.
Yeah.
Thank you all so much.
Unless we get over 100 people, there's no limit on how many people can be in these meetings, right? And even then,
if we get over 100, I'll just switch to my work account. We'll be fine.
That's right. So tell everybody to join. Tell everybody to join in.
Thank you guys so much.
Good to see everybody.